You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. I'm going to give you my best moves of the 2023 Royals season, who is due for regression next year, and lastly, I do have to tip my cap to the Texas Rangers. That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
First things first, thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And be sure to give us a follow on all of those podcasting platforms. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and you can always get us on YouTube. But like I just said, be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We're always welcoming in new listeners. And if you're a long-time listener, send it to somebody who hasn't checked it out yet. It's the off-season, but we still got plenty of Royals stuff to get into. But you're probably wondering, if you're a first-time listener, who I am. Well, what are my credentials? Why am I doing this podcast? Well, I'm just a lifelong Royals fan, as I'm sure you are, tuning into some off-season content. I now work in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a morning show on ESPN Kansas City once a week. I've got a night show on Sports Radio 810. So if you ever want to get my content or my thoughts and opinions on things that don't involve the Royals, well, you might check me out on there because it's football season. College basketball is right around the corner. NBA starts right now. But when you come to this podcast, you are going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Just because the Royals season concluded doesn't mean that I stopped buying tickets off of Gametime. I'm going to a concert tomorrow night. You guessed it, Gametime is where I'm going to go to pick up those tickets. I already did it, actually. I'm not going to go there. I used Gametime the other day to go buy concert tickets. There's a Chiefs game coming up in a couple weeks, Philadelphia Eagles, Monday Night Football. Probably going to use Gametime then if I decide to go to the game. But it's so easy to use, but more on them coming up in about 15 to 20 minutes or so. What I wanted to do today is kind of go back and recap a little bit of what the Royals did in 2023 and not necessarily rank or give a grade for the best moves out there. I just really wanted to bring them to light. Moves that I think for the organization were very important. And some of them are going to be obvious. Some of them you're going to go, well, I know what's coming next. I know number one, I know number two. But some of them I'm hoping I catch you off guard on. You're going, man, I didn't expect Jack to say that was a big-time move for 2023. I was going to originally start off the list, if you will, picking that the Royals moved on from Dayton Moore, but of course that was a move in 2022 instead of 2023. That was right at the very tail end of the year, so I'm not going to use it. This is basically going to be from January on and why they were important to the team, why it's important to the team moving forward. So we're going to kick things off. It's pretty obvious, number one. Hopefully they get a little bit more complicated as I go down this list. But number one, by far and away, it is the acquisition of Cole Ragans and Ronny Cabrera in that Aroldis Chapman deal. And really, to me, it's because of everything that transpired in that deal. And it goes back to the offseason, and that was signing Aroldis Chapman. It was the Royals and the Marlins in a head-to-head race almost. They were neck and neck to get Chapman. And I thought with all my heart, Aroldis Chapman's going to pick Miami. He works out there. He's got the ties to Miami. Why would he pick the Royals over the Marlins? Well, then it was kind of rumored that, well, he's going to get the opportunity to close out games in Kansas City, but that really wasn't the truth. Scott Barlow was the team's closer, so the Royals gave him a little bit more money, and he came and was the setup guy for the first 2 to 3 months of the season. So it starts there. 1-year deal, major league deal. You get Chapman. He pitches incredibly well. You fix him to give you hope that, hey, if you can fix Aroldis Chapman, considering he was with New York the year before and they sent him home before the postseason because they just didn't want him on the roster, you fix him at his age, you flip him for what Cole Ragans turned into, and then you've got a guy like Ronny Cabrera waiting in the wings of the minor leagues. He's down there, just completed the Dominican Summer League, so maybe we see him in low A at some point next year. But that, to me, was the best pickup in that trade until I saw what Cole Ragans became. And you step away from 2023 and go, it didn't matter if the Royals made another move or not. It didn't matter if the Royals were idle at the trade deadline. That was going to be the move that we all focused on and said, man, you want to have faith in J.J. Picollo, this scouting department, the player development, that's the move you go to, because the Royals have never, and I mean never, had a move like that work out like that. You flip Chapman, get a guy who the Rangers were really, I think, able to give up on at that point in time. They were willing to give up on, and you increase his velocity by an average of 4 to 5 miles per hour. And he was the most electric guy in the rotation for the tail end of the year. So shocker, Captain Obvious here saying Cole Reagans was the number one most important move of the offseason. Number two, I think, is not far behind the Cole Reagans deal, because whereas Cole Reagans took your best asset, Aroldis Chapman was the most viable trade option for the Royals. He had the most value, and he was easy to flip because he was a rental. The one that stands out to me arguably more was acquiring James McArthur from the Phillies. Now, Phillies in Game 7 tonight against Arizona, they're not losing sleep over not having James McArthur. They have a completely competent bullpen. But it was the way the Royals went about acquiring him. And like with Reagans, we hadn't seen a move like this from a Royals front office before. Trading away an 18, 19-year-old prospect for a 26-year-old guy who had never made it to the bigs. What are you seeing there? And to me, it was the spin rate. To me, it was the curveball. And I think J.J. Picollo thought the exact same thing. Now, early on, he has the debut from hell. He was not very good. I looked at him and said, I don't know why he has a roster spot anymore. There's nothing there that pops to me. And then all of a sudden, he hits this stride. And in September, he was the Royals' best pitcher, period, you could argue. I mean, Cole Reagans, of course, but Cole Reagans in September started to fight his command a bit. James McArthur was flawless. 5 saves and 5 opportunities. I mean, barely dealt with any base runners. I mean, legitimately a lockdown reliever. And considering how you found him, what you gave up for him, that to me gives me hope the front office can find other guys like James McArthur. You don't need to, empty out the bank. You don't need to empty out the farm system, though there's not much there to begin with, to go out there and get you your stud. You can flip an 18-year-old lottery ticket guy for somebody that you like the spin rate on, the velocity, the pitch repertoire. You want to give him a cutter. You want to give him a slider. I know at Tread right now, it's all over YouTube. Colin Snyder is working with a cutter. Stuff like that the Royals are starting to do, which we didn't really see over the last couple of years during this rebuild. The third big thing for me was it's going to be a good thing and a bad thing here. The third big move was getting Nelson Velasquez for Jose Cuas. That to me was shocking because they got something for Jose Cuas. You didn't trade Carlos Hernandez. You got a couple of prospects, low A guys, rookie ball guys for Scott Barlow. You got a couple of prospects, Devin Mann and Figueroa from the Dodgers for Ryan Yarbrough. But this Jose Cuas deal was a guy in a roster crunch. You flip a guy who was not that good in your bullpen, at least dealt with a lot of base runners, couldn't get guys out when they were on the bases, or runners in scoring position, inherited runners. He was bad with all of it. Couldn't find the zone, and he wasn't that great for Chicago. And you got Nelson Velasquez, who hit home runs left and right. And to me, kind of cemented himself as somebody who could be a very good option in right field next year, a DH role. But to me, that was another one of the moves that said, hey, when you have bullpen pitchers, they're expendable. Okay, even James McArthur next year is a guy you should look into trading if he pitches really well in the first half. You can always flip guys, especially ones with club control. And Jose Cuas had club control. The Royals got a valuable guy who was 24 years old and really took off in Kansas City. So that to me was another move, because the first two was just solely with pitching. This was an offensive bat they had found, and I had not really seen the Royals look to a guy like that. Big time power, swing and miss. Walk rate wasn't that great, but they didn't go to their usual route of let's find speed and defense. So that to me was the third biggest move of the offseason, of the 2023 season. You can also go back to the 2023 offseason if you wanted to make your own list, and I'll leave the comments open for that on YouTube, or you can shoot it over to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. The last big move that I have this year is one that I'm going to go back, and I can't exactly remember when this hiring happened. It wasn't long after Matt Quatrero got the job, but it was adding an extra pitching coach. When you bring in Zach Bove to pair alongside Brian Sweeney, that to me signaled from the very beginning, from the get-go here, J.J. McCullough was a little bit different. You don't go out there and just have one guy. The new way of coaching staffs is you want to have maybe a couple guys for one spot, 2 pitching coaches, 2 hitting coaches. The Giants do a phenomenal job of it. And that to me was the first signal. Maybe I should have put that at the top of the list because I should have ranked these a little bit better, but hopefully you enjoyed the segment anyway. But to me, that was kind of the signal. You have 2 hitting coaches, Alex Zumwalt, Keone Duren, and then you've got Zach Bove and Brian Sweeney. And to bring in 2 guys from outside organizations to kind of co-opt this, if you will, to turn around this pitching program. To me, that was a big-time move. One that went a little bit underappreciated because the Royals didn't have that good of a pitching staff. But I promise you, when you look at this group in year 2, it's going to be a lot different than, of course, what we saw with Cal Eldred, taking on the majority of that workload, if not all the workload. Those guys at the very end in September had a couple segments on the Royals pregame show, and they're always on their computers trying to find ways to help these pitchers. And I think we're going to see a big jump in year 2. But that's something I'm going to keep my eye on. And if the Royals bring in another coach, it wouldn't be a bad thing either. So those really, to me, were the 4 biggest moves of 2023. Maybe they were obvious to you. Maybe some of them surprised. If you've got another big move you like, let us know in the YouTube comments below or on Twitter. Just shoot them over to me at JohnnyJ_15. Okay, the next thing we're going to dive into is some guys on this team that are going to be due for regression. Did we fall for some false hope at the very tail end of the year? Are there some guys that are just never going to reach their potential? Hot second halves are one thing, but carry it into spring training and the other parts of the regular season is another thing. So I'm going to tell you who I think is going to regress next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in FanDuel. We are about to hit a big time month for just sports in general. NFL will be in full swing, college football, college basketball, the NBA, and we still got a World Series to go in Major League Baseball. So you want to make some bets, you want to have some fun, you want to earn some money, FanDuel, is where you need to go to place your bets. Now, October baseball, postseason baseball is in full swing, and you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's a lot of money for such a small bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait till the whole game to get that W, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. You're going to hear me from time to time in the offseason, go over some candidates and go over some bounce back guys and guys that I'm really high on. Somebody I'm starting to buy stock in is Colin Snyder because I've been keeping up to date with what he's doing over at Tread Athletics. Cole Reagans, of course, I'm going to be high on going into spring training, going into February. But I've tried to keep myself reserved as well and not make this podcast just sunshine and rainbows all the time. And I hope if you tuned in since June, that's not what we do here. We're not going to put lipstick on a pig. Okay, if things are not good, we're going to tell you they're not good. If a player's not performing well, we're going to maybe harp on that player a little bit. And I think at the very last part of the year, my intention was to make the team a little bit interesting. Not come on the show and say, well, so-and-so look good, but they're going to lose 106 games. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make the team sound like they were building something for the future, that some of these guys' second half surges meant something. And I still do believe that. I think that it was Alex Zumwalt that said it best, and I heard this on the Royals broadcast in one of the final series of the year, but he said you can either be a warrior or be an excuse maker, and he wants a lot of warriors on the team. If you want to finish off the year in a bad way and go, well, it doesn't matter, these games don't matter. Oh, it does matter. A lot of those guys were still being evaluated up until the very end. But unfortunately, what this segment is designed to do is say, well, there are some guys I believe are going to continue that trend that are meant to surge after this. And there's some guys that you're probably just not going to see a true ceiling for that guy. And sometimes that can be used in a good way. Never having a ceiling can be seen as a positive. Hey, we don't know how good he can be. But to me, in this type of saying, he's got some sort of ceiling, but we just don't know if he's ever going to get there. And time's running out a little bit. Clock's ticking on certain guys. Some guys I'm going to put in here that it's going to pain me to put them in for regression because of maybe how good they were in the second half. So without further ado, I'm going to give you my first guy here. It's going to sting. It pains my heart that I have to say it, but we just have to face the facts here. I think Nelson Velasquez is going to be due for a little bit of a regression. It's not a bad thing. What he did in the second half, what he did in the Royals uniform was pretty much absurd. And what's going to happen to him in 2024, if he's an everyday player, is pitchers are going to adjust a little bit. What we saw with Nelson Velasquez was he was a great fastball hitter, but against the breaking pitches, against the off speed, was not good at all. Now, where it becomes a difference, though, is if you can recognize that, recognize the spin, recognize the drop, recognize the horizontal movement, and lay off those pitches. When he was rolling, when he was really on his hot stretches, he was spitting on those pitches. Even that last series against New York, I saw it a handful of times in all three games. No, he comes up in a big opportunity, second and third, first and third, a runner at second, bases juiced. You don't need to be the hero in that moment. You can spit on those pitches, and I just think there's going to be some slumps. When he slumps, he's going to slump pretty hard because he's a power hitter. And we know this with power hitters. When it's strikeout or home run or walk, when you're down, when you're slumping, a lot of strikeouts are going to follow. So I just think because of how good he was, he is due for a little bit of a regression. I don't think a lot of those numbers are that sustainable, at least the home run numbers. I would like to see his on-base numbers go up a little bit more, but in terms of hitting the ball hard, the amount of times the ball left the yard, for a 162 game sample size, and you probably expect him to play anywhere from 115 to 120, it's not going to be the exact same. So just by technicality, by default, it hurts me. It hurts my heart, but I'm going to say Nelson Velasquez is due for a little bit of a regression. The second one I have here, and maybe tomorrow I'll do guys that are going to progress a little bit after a bad 2023. The next guy I have here to regress just a little bit is Freddie Fermin. Another one of those guys I think it hurts me to pick, but I just don't know what Freddie's role is going to be. If Salvi's back, which right now I've got no signs to say that Salvi's going to be traded, and I'd imagine they're not going to DH him full time. They want Salvi behind the plate. And if that's the case, maybe I shouldn't put Freddie Fermin in my list because whatever he gives you defensively is good enough. Just do enough offensively. But he was a 2F WAR player before he got hurt, and for a catching spot, for a 29-year-old rookie, that's pretty impressive. I just think, though, what we saw from Freddie Fermin, a lot of it was because he was unknown, because he was given a lot of hittable pitches. I still love Freddie Fermin. I think he can be a damn good player for this team in 2024, but I'm sure there's going to be some signs of regression. Remember, there was that 0 for 24, 25 stretch that he had right before the injury. Maybe that was due to a little bit of an injury that was hindering him. But I just kind of feel like the numbers we saw, if he's a backup catcher, if he's a starter especially, you're going to see a little bit of the regression because he's playing every single day. And that can expose some of your flaws. I always think that the guy that was one of my favorite Royals of all time, Gerard Dyson, was a fantastic fourth outfielder. So good defensively, and he'd go out there and maybe go 3 for 4 on a Sunday, but he plays every day. He replaces Alex Gordon. He replaces Lorenzo Cain, Nori Aoki, Alex Rios. He just can't play every single day. And that's fine. Not every player is, and I think Freddie Fermin kind of falls in that category. He's going to be that guy that plays twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, depending Salvi's health. And he may not always be the best guy on the field, but he's going to contribute. And he's going to be a very good contributor where you'll think, why isn't he playing every single day? And then he'll have those slumps where you go, okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me. Still think he can be a valuable member as a backup catcher on this team, but I think we'll probably see a little bit of a regression from him in 2023. The last guy I have on my list here, and there weren't many guys to regress. When we go to September, and I just think that some of the guys' numbers really inflated. That just wasn't sustainable. I don't think Edward Olivares' numbers, though I don't believe he's going to be in Kansas City next year, are very sustainable. I think MJ Melendez could sustain those numbers because I think he had the prospect status to do so. But I just don't think that the majority of the guys have much to regress with. But if there's one guy I am going to pick that we all kind of maybe not fell in love with, but maybe expected just a little bit more, and then he gave it to us in the second half, I am going to go with somebody like a Kyle Isbell in terms of value here. So you could be listening to me and going, that makes no sense. Kyle Isbell wasn't good last year. Well, let me backpedal a little bit here. Kyle Isbell is very valuable. His defense is very valuable. He's one of the better defending center fielders out there. But in terms of overall value, I just think even what we saw last year, there is some signs of regression to me. I'm not sure that bat can ever play at the big league level. I think the defense absolutely can. But another year to be given the center field job slightly. Well, like I said, there's not many guys I can pick that say there's going to be severe regression. This is slight for me. Just because I think the defense, when you are not that great offensively, it's going to not be as dazzling, if you will. It's not going to pop to everybody watching you. And that's why I think there's going to be a slight regression. I don't think the offense is going to get much better. I know if he just hits 250, something like that, you're going to get a very valuable center fielder. But I'm just not sure he gets to that point. I'm not sure the bat ever plays at an everyday level. I think he's a very good fourth outfielder, like I said. But I think the slight regression, again, offensively, is going to make a slight regression defensively. Could be wrong. It's very early to tell. But it seems like Jase Medical wants Kyle Isbell out there every single day. He found out he can play center field in 2023, so I've got no reason to doubt he's going to be out there in 2024. So those are my three guys I think that are due for just a little bit of regression in this upcoming campaign. Okay, the last thing I want to do is give my props to a former Royal as a general manager and for his team getting to their first World Series since 2011. Can they snap that long drought of winning it all? Well, at least I'm going to give my appreciation to that team next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And be sure to download this podcast on where you get your podcast in general. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and you can always find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that subscribe button right there on our YouTube channel. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the other title sponsor today in Gametime. As I stated at the very beginning of the show, I've already bought tickets to a concert tomorrow. I've bought tickets in the past to NFL games. I'm going to a college football game this weekend. And you're exactly right. Gametime is what I use. Then I'm not going by myself to any of those things. So when I'm buying for other people, if I'm recommending tickets to other people, Gametime is where I go to. I'm not always the one that's buying the tickets. I don't have the type of money to do that. But at least with Gametime, it makes it easy for everybody. If I'm looking at somebody or talking to somebody that wants to go to the game, this is what I recommend. I recommend Gametime. It's easy to use. There's no problems with the app. You don't have to wait on your tickets that long. It just takes care of everything for you. You want to go with one person, two people, an entire group, Gametime is where you need to go to. And that's for comedy shows, football games, baseball games, basketball games. There's lots of things going on, and there's lots of stuff to go to here in the coming months. And I strongly urge you to use Gametime for all of your ticket purchasing. So here's what you need to do. After this podcast, go and download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. The terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The last thing I wanted to do today, and to wrap up our show, and I apologize for not having a show yesterday, got caught up with some last-minute work stuff, but we're still going to give you episodes throughout the week. But I had the chance, at least last night, to catch the end of Game 7 of the American League Championship Series. I mean, it was on my TV the majority of the night. I just wasn't zoned in for the entirety of the game. And what we saw is the Rangers run the Astros out of Minute Maid Park. And that entire series, they ran the Astros out of Minute Maid Park. And of course, as we know by now, former Royal Chris Young was the general manager of the Texas Rangers. And what he did last night is change baseball, I think, a little bit. And if you've never heard me say this before, well, I'm telling it to you for the first time. Baseball, to me, is a forever changing sport. It's never going to stop changing. I'm sure people back in 1940 and people in 1950 and 60 and 70 never thought that the game would truly change. And then you start having guys that throw 100 get into the big leagues. You have guys that hit home runs every single at bat, it feels like. Then analytics get involved. And then big-time contracts get involved. Baseball is forever changing. What it looks like today is not what it's going to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, so on and so forth. And so what I'm getting at here is what Chris Young did, changed baseball for the immediate. And I think it's a good thing. The Rangers are so good for Major League Baseball because it's showing a lot of teams out there, no matter what, you can solve your problems by spending a lot of money. Now, it's not everything. That's kind of the misconception with Texas. They didn't just buy everybody. They spent a lot of money, but they also had some big-time trades that brought in some big-time talent. The ALCS MVP, Adolis Garcia, was acquired for cash considerations 4 years ago. They DFA'd Adolis Garcia and got lucky nobody claimed him, and he had like 30 at-bats from 2019 to 2020. I mean, just not really a player at all. And then he breaks onto the scene. Like, they still made moves like that made their lineup, their rotation, their bullpen that much better. I mean, getting Dane Dunning, that's another underrated move they made for their rotation. But what Chris Young did is basically showed, hey, it's okay to go all in. You don't always need to be concerned about the next year, 2025 or 2026. The Rangers lost 102 games 2 years ago. They had 102 games. They spent all that money on Corey Seager and Marcus Semien. They then lost 90-plus games. And what I admire about Chris Young is that he never took his foot off the pedal. He never stopped trying to bolster that team. You lose 90-plus, well, we need to spend money elsewhere. I've seen a lot of owners and general managers, after spending money, kind of go back with the tail between their legs, look like a scared puppy dog. Oh, we shouldn't have spent that much money. Now we need to look elsewhere to build this team. I don't want to put that much money again. Chris Young and the Texas ownership were, all in from last November. They weren't scared about what was going to happen in 2023 because they knew they were going to be this good. And they spent all that money. And if you're criticizing them for spending money and, they're not going to be good 3 years from now, if they get a ring, if they get a flag flying over a Globe Life Park, you think they're going to care? That's a future problem. You don't need to worry about that. It's why at the deadline, you're supposed to go all in for World Series championship. That's what you do in baseball. When you're a general manager and an owner, you owe it to the guys on the field to give them their best possible chance. And Chris Young did that. I tip my cap to that. Now, the Royals don't have the Rangers type of money, but don't get it twisted. John Sherman could open up his wallet and J.J. Picollo could spend a lot of money this offseason. I mean, the Rangers weren't really in any business of spending 2 years ago. They lost 100-plus games. But they wanted to fix a lot of their problems by spending, and it took them 2 years to do it. But if I told you right now, in 2025, the Royals will be in an American League Championship Series by spending that much money, you'd take it, right? You wouldn't worry about 2027, 2028, or 2029. That's a future problem. And that's why it's kind of funny when I'm blanking on his name now, but the Seattle GM talking about, we're setting ourselves up to be competitive every single year, and that's better than going for broke 1 year. Well, I mean, can you ever guarantee you're going to be competitive every year? You're going to have injuries. Guys are going to underperform, and that's what I admire about Texas. They never stop loading up that team. And they're an expensive team, and they may not be good 2 to 3 years from now. They may be like the Mets where you spend all the money and then you just have guys under contract that aren't going to be that good for you. But if they get a ring and they can raise that banner, raise that flag in Arlington, it's all going to be worth it. Now, to this point, I said Chris Young and Texas, they're changing baseball a little bit because we had seen in the past, New York spent a lot of money, didn't make the postseason. The Yankees spent a lot of money, didn't make the postseason. Both the Yankees and the Mets actually did that. Now you talk about some teams that didn't spend a lot of money, were really good. Who'd they lose to? Tampa, low payroll. Baltimore, low payroll. They didn't win a game against Texas. And I think the model is always, Baltimore, they draft so well. They find these key guys and bargain bin shot, basically, and they're the number 1 seed. The Rays started the year like 19-2, something like that. And it was ridiculous. But when it mattered most, who won? The team that spent more money, the team that was more aggressive, and that's the Texas Rangers. Now tonight, Game 7 of the Phillies and the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Diamondbacks can change baseball a little bit because they didn't go all in. In fact, Torey Lovullo, I looked this up yesterday, his first year in Arizona, they won 90-plus games. Then there was a rebuild in the middle of it, but they stuck with Lovullo. They lost 110 2 years ago, and here they are about to eliminate the reigning NL champs. Not about to, but they've got a chance to. And if they do that, you're looking at a World Series that has altered baseball a little bit. You can take both paths, and both are successful. The Rangers spent money and made a lot of trades to solve their problems. The Diamondbacks, I think, did a little bit of it all. They spent some money on the bullpen, spent some money on the rotation, made some big-time trades, made some minor trades, had acquired young talent, and all of it came together at once. So maybe I should be rooting for Arizona tonight. I love Philly, love the atmosphere, love the players on it, but I'm not going to be disappointed with who wins Game 7 tonight. But first things first, I got to tip my cap to the Texas Rangers. Phenomenal job. I'm glad they're in the World Series in 2023. And, of course, a big-time, appreciation post monologue, if you will, for Chris Young, the former Royal, who got the Royals a World Series ring, at least helped get the Royals a World Series ring in 2015, and hopefully can get one for the Rangers in 2023. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into that Game 7 matchup between the Phillies and the Diamondbacks, and we're also going to give you some guys that may be progressing. Thought about that on the fly, gave you the guys who may regress today. Tomorrow, we're going to look at some guys that are going to progress, and one more special segment that we're going to do on Locked On Royals. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.